Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. He was none other than Song Ke. His aura was weak and faltering, and he was covered with wounds. In many places, bone was visible amidst the blood and gore. Because of a smoking, black handprint that could be seen on his chest, his 5 yin organs and 6 yang organs were nearly destroyed. He was missing an eye, and clearly, was on his last legs. It was as if he remained standing by sheer willpower alone, as strong and tall as a mountain. Earlier, the Vile Prince had dispatched all of his demigods to assist Prince Demon and the other celestials in delaying Bai Xiaochun. By that point, the Vile Prince had already begun to go completely crazy. He had spent several days trying to break down Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo, and had reached a critical juncture in which success was just around the corner. That was when Song Ke barged into Vile Prince Mansion. Black robes fluttering, and spear in hand, he began to slaughter the devas who stood in his way, slowly making his way toward the Grand Hall. Just when the most critical of moments arrived, he struck the door with his spear, backing it with all of the cultivation base power he could muster, as well as his unswerving determination. By this point in his life, he cared not for matters of life and death, and therefore held nothing back in his attempt to break open the door. When the door shattered, the Vile Prince began to descend into utter madness. All of his schemes and plots had come down to his very moment, only to have Song Ke interrupt him. Furious, he began to vent his rage on Song Ke. Song Ke, with his diva cultivation base, did not shrink back. Without any hesitation, he began to fight the Vile Prince, who was a demigod. Although the fighting did not reach the spectacular level of the original fight between Bai Xiaochun and Taoist Heavenspan, it was momentous, to say the least. Blood spattered as the two combatants fought madly, with Song Ke drawing upon all of the murderous aura he had built up over the years. He knew that he wasn't a match for the Vile Prince, and yet, he didn't hesitate at all to fight. After all, he was fighting for his beloved aunt. He didn't care much about Zhou Zimo, but simply could not ignore Song Junwan. She was his closest relative. And when he saw her swollen belly, he also knew that he was fighting for his nephew, a nephew whose father could only be Bai Xiaochun. Although he had always wanted to outdo Bai Xiaochun, and never really liked him very much, he could not forget everything that Bai Xiaochun had done for him since their original meeting in the Fallen Sword Abyss. Song Ke was a proud person, but by this point in his life, he felt no grudge toward Bai Xiaochun. And although he realized that Bai Xiaochun was his superior, he had always believed himself capable of catching up, and thus, he came to fight. For his aunt, for his nephew, and for Bai Xiaochun's flesh and blood. He fought without regrets, filled with the desire to do battle to the very end. The Vile Prince was already shaken. He had never before met a diva who could endure under the fury of his attacks. And yet, over and over again, Song Ke held strong, making it impossible for the Vile Prince to continue his work with the spell formation. Although it seemed beyond the bounds of possibility, Song Ke, a mere diva, held out for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. He could see that, despite the fact that Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo seemed incomparably weak as they sat there in the spell formation, they were still alive. And their children were still safe. If he didn't hold out for enough time, the consequences would be too horrific to imagine. To last for the time it takes an incense stick to burn required that Song Ke sustain mortal injuries, but hold strong. As the Vile Prince threw everything he could at him, Song Ke ignored the pain and injuries and repeated one thing to himself. Hold strong. Hold strong. Hold strong. When Bai Xiaochun finally shot down from the sky and entered Vile Prince Mansion, Song Ke knew that it had all been worth it. The Vile Prince was in a state of madness, gasping for breath as he unleashed one attack after another. Why won't you just die, damn it? Die. He could see Bai Xiaochun approaching, and his heart pounded with defiance. I was close. So close. Staring venomously at the dying Song Ke, the Vile Prince turned and fled. In that same moment, Bai Xiaochun's divine sense enveloped the entire mansion. Ignoring the fleeing Vile Prince, he rushed into the main hall to confirm that Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo were safe. Then, it was with grief and sorrow that he turned to look at Song Ke, who stood there, his life slipping away. Song Ke managed to look up at Bai Xiaochun, and then slowly smile. Even in the face of imminent death, he stood tall and straight. He still looked manly and handsome, his eyes flickering with regret at having to leave the world of the living. Voice hoarse, he said, Bai Xiaochun. When we met in the Fallen Sword Abyss, you snatched the heaven string energy that was meant for me. You outdid me by just a hair. In the Bloodstream sect, you did the same thing. Outdid me by a hair. It was the same in the River Defying sect, and at the Great Wall. It's almost like the two of us are cursed by a magic spell. Even in the wildlands, you still outdid me. I used to wonder if you would always outdo me. He staggered to the side a bit. He could hardly keep his eyes open at this point and could sense his consciousness fading. As his last bit of energy drained away, he spoke his final words. Bai Xiaochun, you always did better than me. You always beat me. But today, I, Song Ke, managed to outdo you. With that, he threw his head back and laughed wholeheartedly. Tears streamed down his face as he slowly closed his eyes. He couldn't hold out any longer. The spear in his hand dissolved into ashes, and he toppled forward onto the ground. Song Ke had perished. For his entire life, he had struggled defiantly, always trying to catch up. But this time, just as he had said, he really did outdo Bai Xiaochun. He didn't wish to give in to death, but had no choice. However, as his consciousness faded away, he was happy. Bai Xiaochun trembled as he looked at Song Ke's corpse, completely aware that without his sacrifice, his own wives and children would be dead. Song Ke had offered up his own life for them. Song Ke, he murmured, tears beginning to roll down his cheeks. The pain he felt in this moment was the type that could shake heaven and earth. He suddenly found himself recalling old memories of Song Ke, back in the wildlands, at the Great Wall, in the river-defying sect, the Bloodstream sect, and finally, their initial meeting in the Fallen Sword Abyss. You're the true chosen. He couldn't stop the tears, but at the same time, knew that time was limited. He had to endure the pain and sorrow, no matter how hard it was. He quickly sent Song Ke's corpse to the damaged fan, then turned and destroyed the spell formation in the Grand Hall. When he saw the faint violet light coming from the totem tattoo on Song Junwan's arm, he immediately recognized the aura. Bruiser, he murmured. Then he looked at the swollen bellies of Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo, and reached out to touch them. He could sense the unborn children inside of them, moving. They seemed happy. All of a sudden, he felt powerful bonds of attachment connecting them to him. Considering how tiny and weak they were, Bai Xiaochun knew that protecting them was now the most important mission in his life. Your mother's protected you before, he murmured, but from here on out, Dad will keep you safe. Unsure of how to describe the feelings inside of him, he quickly sent the unconscious Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo to the damaged fan. Now that he was the owner of the fan, it was a simple task to send people there as long as they didn't fight back. After doing so, he looked up. Instead of making his escape, he decided to seek vengeance. The vile prince was still alive. How could he not take revenge on someone who had attempted to kill his wives and children? How could he not take revenge on someone who had attempted to extract the blood of tens of thousands of heavenspan cultivators? How could he not take revenge for the death of Song Ke? Murderous aura raging, he blurred into motion, locking onto the panicked, fleeing vile prince. You shall die, he growled, his eyes glowing with bizarre red light. Taking a step forward, he vanished, to reappear right in front of the vile prince. Waving his hand, he sent a frigid wind out that seemed capable of cleaving flesh from bone. It was like an enormous mouth that lunged toward the vile prince as if to devour him. The vile prince simply didn't have time to react. Almost before Bai Xiaochun's figure even became completely clear, everything around him was filled with deadly, frigid cold. Father, save me, he shouted in alarm. Before the cold wind could touch him, a terrifying energy suddenly erupted from within the imperial palace. Instantly, the clouds up above swirled, forming together into an enormous face. It was threatening without being angry, and wore an imperial crown. It was none other than the vile emperor. How dare you, Bai Xiaochun? Although he spoke in a calm voice, it contained energy that shook all creation, and cast fear into the hearts of all living beings. Even Bai Xiaochun felt as though he were being suffocated. Bai Xiaochun knew that he was taking a big risk. Trying to kill the vile prince was a big gamble. Not only was he gambling that the vile emperor had certain plans and schemes that no one knew about, but he was also gambling that the vile prince wasn't actually very important to the vile emperor. After all, this vile emperor was not really the vile emperor. Although the words the vile emperor had just spoken shook all the lands, Bai Xiaochun gritted his teeth and, instead of slowing down or fleeing, pushed his cultivation base even harder. Waving his hand, he unleashed an even more shocking wind, which instantly overwhelmed the vile prince. The wind began to flay his skin, and assail his bones with intense pain. The screams which echoed out from inside the wind almost didn't sound human. Up in the sky, the vile emperor's face looked down at Bai Xiaochun with cold, narrowed eyes, and flickering killing intent. Then, the face distorted as a huge hand appeared that shot down toward Bai Xiaochun. Since you want to die, I'll accommodate you. This was a palm strike from an Archean, and it instantly struck fear into the hearts of everyone, even Virupaxa and Reverend Devourer. As the palm descended, everything around Bai Xiaochun was completely locked down due to the immense energy involved. From what the onlookers could tell, he only had one option. He had to give up on trying to kill the vile prince, and then do his best to flee. If he obstinately persisted, then perhaps he might be able to kill the vile prince, but he himself would surely die in the process. Before passing the 99th level of the damaged fan, Bai Xiaochun might have struggled about what to do. But now that he had passed that level, he had already suffered a blow from an Archean. Archeans are strong, but if he wants to kill me, he won't be able to do it that way. Looking up, Bai Xiaochun let out a shout at the top of his lungs, drawing on all of his fleshly body power, and rotating his cultivation base at top speed. He also unleashed a bevy of divine abilities, although he didn't resort to pulling out his turtle walk. After all, this was only an illusory palm strike that he was dealing with, and after his experiences on the damaged fan, he was confident. After that 99th level, he felt mentally prepared to deal with an attack from an Archean expert. Without any hesitation, he used his Sutra of Former Reincarnation, causing numerous magical symbols to surround the Archean palm. The multitude of images that appeared within them caused the vile emperor's pupils to constrict as he negated their effect. However, in that short moment of time that he spent doing so, Bai Xiaochun summoned the gates of life and death. As the hand closed in, it grew weaker and weaker, as though it were passing from life into death. It all happened in the time it takes to think, and then, the palm struck. Intense rumbling sounds filled all heaven and earth, causing both the Imperial Palace and Vile Emperor City as a whole to shake physically. Many buildings in the area even collapsed. Countless onlookers cried out in shock and alarm. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun's divine abilities were crushed and destroyed. His cultivation base and his fleshly body were simply not capable of standing up to an Archean attack. However, the attack was visibly weaker than it should have been, especially after being struck by the Sutra of Former Reincarnation and the Gates of Life and Death. Despite the deafening boom, and despite the blood which sprayed out of his mouth, Bai Xiaochun was still standing. Impossible. Celestial Virupaxa gasped. The other celestials were struck speechless, much less the demigods and devas. Almost no one could believe what they were witnessing there in Vile Emperor City. As for the Vile Emperor's true self, a serious expression flickered in his eyes as he sat there thoughtfully in his private chamber in the Imperial Palace. Then, a bizarre smile spread out on his face. As all of that was happening, the frigid wind Bai Xiaochun had deployed against the vile prince continued to rip his skin and flesh off of his bones, and whittle his bones into nothing. The pain was literally impossible to describe. Screams echoed out as he was flayed alive, and his bones destroyed. Soon, only his soul remained, which Bai Xiaochun reached out and grabbed. He had originally planned to simply kill the vile prince, but then changed his mind. That was too easy. Vengeance demanded that the vile prince not die such a simple death. There were too many things to atone for. The Heavenspan corpse puppets in the Imperial Palace, the gaze of the Arch-Emperor in his final moments, the tens of thousands of Heavenspan realm cultivators trapped in the spell formation, the mortal danger Bai Xiaochun's wives and children had been placed in, and finally, Song Qiu's death. Because of all of those things, there was no way he would give the vile prince a quick and easy death. Therefore, he efficiently extracted the vile prince's soul. You like to switch bodies with people, don't you? You like to make puppets, don't you? You like to torture people to death, don't you? As the words left Bai Xiaochun's mouth, a look of profound horror appeared on the face of the vile prince's soul. Father, save me. Apparently, those were the only words he was capable of speaking now. And yet, before he could even finish saying them, Bai Xiaochun tossed the soul into his bag of holding. Only then did the time come to retreat. After all, he knew that he had caused a major disaster in the eternal immortal domains. It was a disaster the likes of which would shake all cultivators in existence. He had killed Deadfall, and captured both Demon and the Vile Prince. As of this point, there was no way he could be allowed to remain alive within the Vile Emperor dynasty. Although he wasn't sure if and when the Vile Emperor would actually show up in person, he knew that he couldn't wait around to find out. Time to go back to the damaged fan. Having made his decision, he sent out a thought, and began to vanish. However, as he did, a whistling sound echoed out from the Imperial Palace. Rumbling sounds filled the area as the doors of the Imperial Palace's Grand Hall exploded, and a stream of light shot out. There, wearing imperial robes and an imperial crown, was none other than the Vile Emperor. He moved as quickly as lightning to appear right in front of Bai Xiaochun, his eyes glittering as he performed an incantation gesture and waved his finger. I know you got your hands on the sovereign's fan, Bai Xiaochun. I've been watching you for quite some time, waiting for this very moment. Please, take me back with you to the sovereign's fan. Although no one but Bai Xiaochun could hear the words, they immediately caused his mind to spin. As the vile emperor's finger waved through the air, a strange connection sprang up between him and Bai Xiaochun. Even as Bai Xiaochun's face fell, he faded away, as did the vile emperor, whose face shone with greed and anticipation. As Bai Xiaochun disappeared from Vile Emperor City in the eternal immortal domains, so did the Vile Emperor. Out in the dark void, the only light to be seen came from the damaged fan, like the shining of countless torches. On the main square, the spirit automaton Bai Xiaochi stood there, looking helplessly at two women and a corpse. The women were beautiful, and despite being extremely weak, were definitely alive. Unfortunately, despite the vast stores of knowledge which existed in Bai Xiaochi's mind, he had no idea why their bellies were so large. What's going on here? He grumbled. Why did that shameless bastard send a corpse up here? Bai Xiaochi was not very happy about what was happening. Unsure of what these two women had to do with Bai Xiaochun, all he could do was squat off to the side, sighing and staring. Bai Xiaochun hadn't been gone for very long, to the point where Bai Xiaochi hadn't even had a chance to sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about having a new master. After all of the years of freedom he had experienced, it was somewhat of a depressing thought, and was a constant source of sighing. Suddenly, his expression flickered, and the depressed frown vanished from his face, to be replaced by a wide smile. Looking very ingratiating, he bowed at the waist in a certain direction some distance away on the main square. Bai Xiaochun was materializing in that very direction. Before the process was finished, Bai Xiaochun shouted out in an anxious voice. Activate the defensive formation, little automaton. We're under attack. Bai Xiaochi shivered as, right behind Bai Xiaochun, another figure began to take shape. At the same time, an Archean aura erupted out, an aura filled with greed and excitement. At long last, I'm back. This sovereign fan is now mine. Shrieking, Bai Xiaochi waved his sleeve to collect up the two women and the corpse. Backing up, he performed an incantation gesture, causing the entire damaged fan to tremble and emit bright light. At the same time, the image on the face of the fan erupted with powerful fluctuations that shot toward the vile emperor. A whole string of defensive countermeasures were unleashed at the same time. Simultaneously, Bai Xiaochun leapt to join Bai Xiaochi, drawing upon all the powers he had at his disposal to suppress the vile emperor. The vile emperor was now about half materialized. His facial features were visible, and his divine sense was already spreading out into the fan. However, as soon as the fluctuations of the defensive countermeasures hit his divine sense, it dissipated. Furthermore, as the vile emperor continued to materialize, he suddenly found a force of expulsion pushing at him. It was clearly a shock to the vile emperor. Despite having come prepared, he could never have guessed that the fan's spirit automaton would heed Bai Xiaochun's orders. The implications were obvious, and caused a look of incredulity to appear on the vile emperor's face. You actually took control of the damaged fan? Impossible. It's too difficult to bond with this treasure. A celestial simply couldn't do it. Not only would you have to pass all 100 levels, but you would have to deal with resistance from the spirit automaton as well. It's just too hard. Despite the vile emperor's disbelief, the fluctuations of expulsion only continued to grow stronger. Letting out a growled shout, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing black flames to shoot forth. Along with the flames came a burst of Archean power, which managed to resist the force of expulsion to some degree. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Bai Xiaochi blurted. Off to the side, Bai Xiaochun was getting very nervous. Get him out of here, otherwise we're finished. Come on, you're the spirit automaton, right? This is a sovereign treasure. Is it really that hard to get an Archean out of here? Ignoring matters of propriety, Bai Xiaochi angrily shouted, shut the hell up. This is a living Archean we're talking about. If he was outside the fan it would be one thing. But he's already halfway inside. Fudge, I'm doing everything I can. Bai Xiaochun didn't have time to get angry about Bai Xiaochi's tone of voice. Racked with anxiety, he yelled, let's join forces. Use that sovereign arm we got. We have to get this bastard out of here. Bai Xiaochi was a bit hesitant to agree, but also knew that failure was not an option. Grinding his teeth, he joined forces with Bai Xiaochun, causing the wolfish arm that now existed in the face of the fan to slowly stretch out. As that happened, the vile emperor gasped. The arm of a sovereign, he said, shocked. Originally, he had assumed that once he got to the sovereign's fan, he could easily take control of it. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaochun had already become the new owner and had turned the entire situation upside down. The vile emperor was not yet willing to just leave. All of a sudden, his eyes turned pitch black, and a bizarre aura swept out from inside of him. As the aura merged with his Archean cultivation base, he suddenly started growing stronger and stronger. Black flames raged around him, shoving away the fluctuations of expulsion. As that happened, he began to grow clearer and clearer, and even took a step forward onto the main square. Obviously, he was only moments away from fully materializing. Both Bai Xiaochun and Bai Xiaoqi were going crazy with anxiety. Bai Xiaochun spat out some blood to gain more power, and Bai Xiaoqi pushed his divine sense to the point of inflicting harm on himself. Together, they forced the sovereign's arm to move even faster toward the vile emperor. Before the vile emperor could fully materialize, the arm slammed into him, accompanied by deafening rumbling sounds. "Get back to where you came from," Bai Xiaochun shouted. The enormous sovereign arm seemed powerful enough to destroy the heavens and crush the earth. As it bore down on the vile emperor, he began to tremble, and yet, his eyes grew even blacker, causing more flames to erupt around him. Soon, they formed together into an enormous flame giant, hundreds of meters tall, that howled as it prepared to fight the incoming sovereign arm. The flame giant shuddered as the sovereign arm slammed into it. A moment later, it collapsed, revealing the vile emperor. Strangely, because of the bizarre aura that swirled around him, the sovereign arm suddenly lurched to a halt for a brief moment. Seizing that moment of advantage, the vile emperor roared, forcing himself to fully materialize. As that happened, Bai Xiaochun unleashed all of the cultivation base power he could, as well as his divine sense, forcing the sovereign's arm to continue its attack. "Time to go for broke," Bai Xiaoqi shouted. Blurring into motion, he shot forward to merge into the sovereign arm. A moment later, the arm began to emanate the aura of a sovereign. The vile emperor's face fell as the black flames around him began to flicker wildly, as though they might be extinguished at any moment. Although he had fully materialized, the arm was locked onto him, making it impossible for him to flee the incoming attack. Howling, he shot forward to meet it. The resulting boom caused the entire fan to shake wildly. "You can't stay away forever, Bai Xiaochun," the vile emperor shouted. He was already returning to where he came from, not of his own accord, but because of the attack from the sovereign's arm, and the sovereign aura which came with it. To the vile emperor, it was supremely frustrating, like having a door opened up right in front of him, but being unable to enter it. As the vile emperor vanished, Bai Xiaoqi flew head first out from inside the sovereign's arm, his face pale. Before he even landed onto the main square, he was unconscious. As for Bai Xiaochun, he coughed up some blood, and then sat down cross-legged to focus on recovery. It was impossible to say exactly how much time passed. The damaged fan continued to sail through the soundless darkness. It was a state of seemingly ultimate peacefulness. Only the light of the damaged fan could be seen, twinkling in the darkness like a star or planet. However, with the fan's spirit automaton asleep, and Bai Xiaochun meditating to recover, the glimmering light was not as bright as before. One day, Bai Xiaoqi's eyes opened. He looked very tired as he crawled to his feet and looked around blankly. Back when he had passed out, Bai Xiaochun had only been able to lapse into virtual unconsciousness as he meditated. As a result, the enormous sovereign's arm had fallen down onto the surface of the fan, instead of going back into the fan face. Despite not being under anyone's direct control, the arm was still immensely powerful, and had damaged many of the fan ribs. The fan now looked in worse state than ever. The sight caused Bai Xiaoqi to tremble in grief. "My home," he wailed. Within the profound silence, the sound of his wail was particularly ear-piercing, and caused Bai Xiaochun to shiver. Then, his eyes opened, and he leapt to his feet, performing an incantation gesture as he looked around. When he saw that they were no longer under attack, he breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he hurried over to Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo, who were still unconscious. Off to the side, Song Qiu's corpse lay still and unmoving. Because of the strange properties of the fan, his corpse had not yet begun to decompose. He was surrounded by soft, swirling light, power from the fan itself that Bai Xiaoqi had placed over him to protect his body. Although Bai Xiaochun was relieved to see his corpse in good condition, bitterness filled his heart. Off to the side, Bai Xiaoqi was still wailing miserably. Annoyed, Bai Xiaochun snapped, "What's with the damn squawking?" "Shut up," Bai Xiaoqi shouted back emotionally. "This is all your fault." "My home." Stunned, Bai Xiaochun looked around. Moments before, he had been too worried about Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo, and Song Ke to take a close look at the fan. Now that he looked around, and saw how the sovereign's arm had smashed into the fan, he rubbed his nose guiltily. He couldn't help but feel bad, especially considering that it had only been with Bai Xiaoqi's help that he repelled the vile emperor. Now, seeing Bai Xiaoqi looking so sad, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but try to comfort him. Well, you can't blame me. Whatever, I'll help you fix it back up. Bai Xiaoqi blinked a few times in surprise. The truth was that he had immediately regretted his outburst, and was even scared about how Bai Xiaochun might react. Therefore, the words of comfort caught him off guard. He was also a bit excited. However, he knew that he shouldn't push things too far. Snorting, he joined Bai Xiaochun to put the sovereign's arm back into the fan face, and then start working to repair the broken fan ribs. They couldn't repair them perfectly, but did a fair job. After all, the fan was a starry sky treasure, and was also capable of repairing itself to a certain level. At a certain point, such powers of repair took over. Afterward, Bai Xiaochun spent more time recovering. Finally, he headed over to Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo. The sight of them sitting there with their swollen bellies, and with the bruiser totem tattoo on Song Junwan's arm, caused a warm look to appear in Bai Xiaochun's eyes. Feeling very pleased with himself, Bai Xiaoqi looked at Bai Xiaochun, then looked at the two women. Who are they? Bai Xiaochun didn't even look back at him as he quietly replied, they're my Taoist partners. And inside of them are my children. Bai Xiaoqi pondered why someone's Taoist partners would have children in their bellies. It actually sounded somewhat frightening. After some thought, he realized he had another question. What about the corpse? He asked. He was a dear friend. Bai Xiaochun replied, closing his eyes to prevent the grief from showing. Deciding that this was a good chance to get some concessions, Bai Xiaoqi replied, Hey, Bai Xiaochun, you know, I have a way to make sure that your Taoist partners and children get healthier than before. And there's also a chance I could resurrect your friend. Do you think you could maybe change my name back to? What did you just say? Bai Xiaochun interrupted, vanishing and reappearing right in front of Bai Xiaoqi, his eyes shining with madness and excitement. The damaged fan seemed to respond to his emotions, and began to shine more brightly than before. At the same time, rumbling sounds echoed out as the repair work being done to the fan ribs began to speed up. Although Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo seemed to be in normal condition, just sleeping, Bai Xiaochun was fairly certain that they had sustained severe injuries to their vital energy. It was only because of the protection provided by Bruiser, and the powerful lives brewing in their bellies, that they had survived their ordeal. In any case, the injuries they had sustained were the type that Bai Xiaochun would only be able to heal once he was back in completely top shape. Only then could they regain consciousness. It was the same with Bruiser. As for Song Ke, he was dead, with his soul dispersed, nothing more than an empty corpse. Even if Bai Xiaochun became an Archean, he would still be powerless to resurrect him. Therefore, Bai Xiaoqi's words struck Bai Xiaochun like bolts of heavenly lightning. Calm down, Bai Xiaoqi said, backing up a bit in fear. However, worried about the terrifying consequences of saying the wrong thing, he decided to explain everything he knew, and leave nothing out. Listen, your Taoist partner's personal life essences have been severely damaged. That type of essence cannot be restored with common life force. Ordinarily, you would need precious materials of heaven or earth to even attempt to do so, and even then, it would be quite difficult. But we are not in any ordinary place. Things are different here. If we put them in the Taoist Tower of Life and Death, then their life essence will slowly build back up, and their cultivation bases will also progress. As for your good friend, well, let me be perfectly clear right now. I'm not completely sure that I can resurrect him. Years ago, my original master told me that his purpose in creating his Tao essence of life and death was to resurrect someone. In the end, he failed. But I think that the Tao essence of life and death really can resurrect people, although there's only a small chance of success. However, there will be a price to pay. If the Tao essence in the tower is absorbed by your Taoist partners and your friend, then it will gradually weaken. And then, it won't be as easy for you to practice cultivation there. Furthermore, the end chance of success is small. Are you sure you want to do it? Bai Xiaochun didn't hesitate for even a moment. Swishing his sleeve, he picked up Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo, and Song Ke, and flew toward the fan face. As the owner of the fan, he actually didn't need any help from its spirit automaton to enter the fan face. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of the tower atop the mountain in the fan face. He placed Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo on the second floor. Any further would have been harmful to them, and not helpful. As for Song Ke, he took a deep breath and, ignoring the pain and discomfort it involved, took him to the 9th floor. He couldn't stay in that location for long. After putting Song Ke down, he looked at him, wished him well, and then left, anticipation crawling in his heart. He also carefully extracted Bruiser from the totem tattoo on Song Junwan's arm. He wasn't sure when Bruiser had picked up the ability to transform into a totem tattoo, but considering how talented he was, it wasn't a surprise. Bruiser was now in the late Diva realm, very close to reaching the demigod level. The second floor wasn't the right place for Bruiser, but neither was the ninth floor. In the end, Bai Xiaochun found that the third floor was ideal. Having accomplished all of these things, Bai Xiaochun left the tower. After looking back at it for a long moment, he settled down cross-legged to meditate. He would stand guard until Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo both woke up. Based on what Bai Xiaoqi had told him, and based on what Bai Xiaochun knew of the Taoist Tower of Life and Death, he was sure that it wouldn't take very long. Meanwhile, the Vile Emperor returned to the eternal immortal domains, filled with rage. Word was already spreading about how Bai Xiaochun had cut down celestial deadfall, captured Prince Erdemon, executed the Vile Prince, and thrown the city into chaos. Not a single person in either the Vile Emperor dynasty or the Saint Emperor dynasty who heard about what had occurred was not astonished or shaken. He killed celestial deadfall? Heavens! It's been a long time since any celestials fought and killed each other. He captured Prince Erdemon? Damn! Prince Erdemon used to be loyal to the Saint Emperor dynasty. He was Celestial Chen Su's apprentice, but turned traitor. Well, I guess he got what he deserved. This King Heavenspan has really got some guts. From what I remember, he was only a demigod when he arrived in the eternal immortal domains. He executed the Vile Prince. How shocking. Tensions rose between the two dynasties, and many cultivators came to the conclusion that war would soon break out. The wrath of the Vile Emperor caused hatred for Heavenspan cultivators to grow in the Vile Emperor dynasty. However, most of those who had openly declared their identity were now safe in the Greatsword of the North. As for those who kept their identity secret, they were not under immediate threat, and yet, many of them began to make their way to the Saint Emperor dynasty. As such, those who suffered persecution were actually few and far between. Most importantly, Gongsun Wan'er lived up to the trust Bai Xiaochun had placed in her. She even took Big Fatty Zhang with her. Although she didn't technically betray the Vile Emperor dynasty by her actions, she came close. During the time in which the Vile Emperor was fighting with Bai Xiaochun on the damaged fan, she delivered the Greatsword of the North to the Grand Heaven Master. Thanks to the advance notice she gave him before arriving to deliver the sword, he had plenty of time to make certain preparations. Overnight, virtually all of the people of Heavenspan vanished from the eternal immortal domains. Their place of hiding was none other than the Greatsword of the North, which Gongsun Wan'er kept on her person as she fled as a fugitive to parts unknown. Of course, the Saint Emperor was a hypocritical liar down to the core. Considering how cruelly the Vile Emperor dynasty was treating the Heavenspan realm cultivators, and considering that Bai Xiaochun was missing and possibly dead, the Saint Emperor took advantage of the situation to open his arms in welcome. Because of this, the situation was less of a disaster for the Heavenspan realm cultivators than it might have been. Regardless of the Saint Emperor's motives, his actions benefited the Heavenspan cultivators, and were just the help they needed. War did not break out between the two dynasties. After all, celestial deadfall was soon resurrected by the Vile Emperor. And Prince Erdemon had been captured, not killed. Although that still left the Vile Emperor dynasty down a celestial, it didn't swing the balance of power completely in the favor of the Saint Emperor dynasty. Many people said that things would soon go back to normal, and generally speaking, that was what happened. 10 years passed. Eventually, the Vile Emperor's fury toward Gongsun Wan'er was sated, and he stopped searching for her. He even issued a proclamation stating that her crimes would be forgiven if she simply returned to him. 10 more years passed. People still talked about Bai Xiaochun occasionally, but not as often. Another decade went by. In total, half of a 60-year cycle passed. By this point, tensions had completely eased between the two dynasties, and everything was mostly back to normal. People were starting to forget about Bai Xiaochun, although the cultivators from the Heavenspan realm would often talk about him with deep sighs. The giant Ghost King and Grand Heaven Master, Li Qinghao, Patriarch Spirit Stream, and others who had been close with Bai Xiaochun were now in the Greatsword of the North, and they missed him dearly. However, they knew one thing. Bai Xiaochun was not dead. And he would return eventually. It was a hope that burned inside of them, fueling their faith and their strength to endure. That half of a 60-year cycle flew by on the damaged fan just as quickly as it had in the eternal immortal domains. During that time, Bai Xiaochun remained on the mountain in the face of the fan, sitting in front of the tower, meditating. Thanks to the resources he had acquired from the various levels of the fan, and his own talents and abilities, his cultivation base climbed steadily. However, breaking through into the late celestial realm was turning out to be very difficult. Only after 30 years did he finally sense an impending breakthrough. Although that might seem like a long time, if word of it got out, other Celestials would have been completely shocked. After all, most Celestials would spend 300 years going from the mid-celestial realm to the late celestial realm. Taking only 30 years was completely unheard of. Some of it had to do with the resources at his disposal, and some of it had to do with the sovereign's arm, which constantly emitted a sovereign aura that benefited his cultivation base and sped up his cultivation. And thus, he made rapid progress with his sutra of present life and death. Eventually, his eyes snapped open and he took a deep breath, his cultivation base rotating rapidly the entire time. As of this moment, he had reached the great circle of the sutra of present life and death. The signs of an imminent breakthrough were more obvious than ever. I'm going to break through. Bai Xiaochun suddenly materialized next to him, his eyes glittering. Although Bai Xiaochun had spent most of the past 30 years in meditation, Bai Xiaochun was still happy to have someone with him in the damaged fan. He still found Bai Xiaochun to be somewhat repulsive, but it was to Bai Xiaochun's delight that he finally agreed to let him pick a new name. Unfortunately, even after 30 years, Bai Xiaochun hadn't been able to come up with a good new name. None of the ideas he came up with seemed to fit. For one thing, he needed to come up with a name that, if someone came along in the future and changed it, would still sound good. Even as he was pondering the issue of a new name, he sensed the aura of Bai Xiaochun's breakthrough, and hurried over to see him. This guy takes too many risks. However, if he keeps up this level of cultivation, then he might actually reach the Archean realm. In fact, he might even become a sovereign. He suddenly thought back to Bai Xiaochun's previous breakthrough, when he had emanated the essence of time. At this point, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes, whereupon an intense rumble rolled out to fill the entire damaged fan. As his aura roiled, the river, the boat, and even the sovereign's arm all began to glitter with bright light. As the light shone brighter and brighter, and as his aura grew stronger, he passed a certain barrier, and finally climbed into the late celestial realm. The light shining from Bai Xiaochun's eyes surpassed the one shining from the fan, becoming the brightest thing in the dark void that surrounded them. Rising to his feet, he threw his head back and let loose a long, piercing cry. Late celestial realm. Bai Xiaochun assumed that Bai Xiaochun's session of cultivation was over. However, that was when Bai Xiaochun sent his divine sense out into the Taoist Tower of Life and Death to check on Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo and Bruiser, as well as Song Ke. Then, he blurred into motion, coming to a stop on top of the sovereign's arm. There, he sat down cross-legged, unleashed his divine sense, and began to merge with the arm. What are you doing? Bai Xiaochun blurted in shock. Fusing with the arm of a sovereign. Heavens! That's impossible. Nothing is impossible, Bai Xiaochun said, looking at Bai Xiaochun with a look of crazed determination. 30 years of cultivation might not seem like a lot to many cultivators, but it was the longest period of time that Bai Xiaochun had ever spent cultivating. Despite the time that had passed, he was still possessed with madness because of the death of Song Ke, and the danger that his wives, children, and Bruiser had been placed in. He was worried about Li Qinghao, the giant ghost king, the Grand Heaven Master, Gongsun Wan'er, and everyone else he knew. And he understood that the only way to do anything about the situation was to get stronger. After 30 years of practicing cultivation that was aided by a sovereign aura, he had come to a much better understanding of the nature of that arm. And he had long since come up with a new idea. I'm going to fuse with that arm. If it works, then my battle prowess will skyrocket. I'm going back. And I'm going to do some killing. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.